So yeah, my name is Timothy Jacobs. I am a WordPress core committer. That means I work on the core WordPress project. I'm also a software developer at iThemes, where I work on iThemes security. So today I'm going to be chatting to you about WordPress 6.0, and we're kind of going to be doing some interactive demo and taking a look at some of the new features that are in WordPress 6.0. WordPress 6.0 did release at this point a month ago. We usually try and do these a little bit before the release, but that didn't happen this time. So instead of my usual spiel about how you can test updating WordPress 6.0, I would say you should probably update to WordPress 6.0. It's been a pretty stable release. I haven't seen too many crazy breaking changes, anything like that. It should be pretty safe to go. Before I dive into the bits of demo, there are a couple of blog posts that I just wanted to reference. One is, this is the WordPress 6.0 field guide. The field guide is kind of like an overview of all of the changes that happened in WordPress 6. And there are lots of different blog posts here. These are mainly for more technical audience, and if that's you, these are posts that I highly recommend checking out. Again, I would have checked them out before WordPress 6.0 released to make sure your plugins, your themes, and everything are all compatible. But if you haven't seen these are a great thing to browse into if you're a little technically minded. The other thing that I wanted to cover is some performance improvements. You might have heard some discourse recently about WordPress not being as performant as it could be, as performant as other options on the web, and that might be having a negative impact on WordPress adoption. And that's something that different members of the WordPress project are kind of keenly aware of and thinking about. And so what has started in WordPress 6.0 is the start of a new performance team. And this team is kind of dedicated to taking looks at parts of WordPress and figuring out how can we make them perform better, faster, quicker, both for small sites and particularly for larger sites. And so the first of their changes have kind of arrived in 6.0. We have this blog post here that talks about caching improvements in WordPress 6.0. As an end user, this isn't something you need to be aware of. But as a plugin developer, it's something that you can take advantage of. And hosting environments can make this work even better to have a more of an impact on their sites. There are also improvements to taxonomies in WordPress 6.0. I'm not going to jump into the technical details of these, but again, it's things about caching and making sure that expensive queries don't get run more often than they need to. And here's one of these performance improvements for large sites. So WordPress has had these optimizations in WordPress for whenever you're on a multi-site install with thousands and thousands of users. But starting in WordPress 6.0, this will also apply to single site installs. So if you have a giant single site with more than 10,000 users, there are some performance optimizations that WordPress can apply, and it'll be able to do those now for you. There have also been extensive accessibility changes. This is a kind of a snapshot of all the commits that I'm scrolling through here. One of the kind of difficulties with WordPress Gutenberg is that they're doing something that's kind of pretty radical, and it requires a lot of engineering to make it work as accessibly as possible. And the accessibility team has been hard at work, and Gutenberg engineers have been hard at work for improving that aspect of WordPress. So with those kind of things covered, I'm going to dive a bit into the actual WordPress 5.6 release. So the first thing you'll see when you install WordPress 6.0 is this giant banner that is welcoming you to WordPress 6. You can learn more about this 6.0 version, and that takes you to this really awesome page that kind of shows you some brief overviews of some of the cool features that we wanted to highlight. So we can see a couple of those here. And you can always get back to this by going to WordPress and About WordPress, and you can visit this link at any time. It's a pretty great resource if you weren't familiar with it for learning about what changes in every release. So beyond that, we're going to take a look at a couple of improvements first to the general block editor for everyone, and then we'll take a look at some things for full site editing in specific. So I'm going to create an About page here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert one of the cool templates from the About page. Let's go into our patterns section here. So we can find one of those cool About page patterns. Where are you? Where's the one I'm looking for? Well, I was looking for one in particular, but I can't seem to find it. So I guess we'll just choose. Is it called About? There we go. OK, About page with media on the left. So yeah, this is a pretty complex block pattern that's made up of a lot of different blocks. And one of the things that's new in WordPress 6.0 is improvements to the list view. So the list view is my favorite way to navigate the WordPress block editor. I can access it by going up to this little 3 dashes menu. And what's new in 6.0 is that the list view now collapses everything by default. This only used to happen in the site editor, but now it happens everywhere. And this list view has gotten a bit supercharged. One of the coolest things that we can do, we've always been able to rearrange things. So I can move blocks around like this. Well, not always. That's also a somewhat new feature. But what's also new is that now I can select multiple blocks and move them around all at once. So if I wanted to, for some reason, move this heading and paragraph after the social icons, I can drag those two together and move them around, which is pretty neat. Another thing that's new here, though, is a kind of sneaky feature, which is block locking. And so this is, I think, a particularly interesting feature that people can use when they're building sites for clients. So we have this kind of complex template here. There's a lot going on. I could easily see maybe a client who isn't super familiar with things accidentally deleting one of these blocks or dragging them somewhere and breaking something, like putting it over here. And it's like, oh no, what's wrong with my site? How do I fix it? And so what's new in WordPress 6 is a block locking feature. So with this, I can lock down a block and prevent it from being moved or removed. And I do that, I can do it through the list view, which is my favorite way. Or you can go into the little 3 dots inside the block editor and open up the lock heading attribute. And so my block name is called heading, so it's up here. And we get a couple of different options for locking things around. I can prevent people from moving the block at all. And I can also prevent people from removing the block. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock up all of these blocks. Lock all. There's not a great, hey, let's just lock everything below this type of thing. You kind of have to actually lock everything individually, which is a little bit unfortunate, but maybe a future improvement that can be done. And let's lock this guy. And we'll lock this guy. And so what this has done is that I can now no longer mess up my layout here. The Doug Stilton text here is not something that I can drag and move somewhere else. I can't accidentally delete it. I can still edit the text and make changes to typography and things like that, but it's much harder for me to break my website. Now, the way that this kind of works out of the box is that anyone who is able to edit the post, they can turn off the lock. So it's kind of just like a fail-safe. But one of the cool things you can do is you can use a little bit of custom code to actually change who can change things around and who can edit locks. So I have my client users set up here. And the way I kind of recommend setting up client users in WordPress is to give them an editor account and say, hey, this is what you want to use day to day to day. If something super bad happens, I'll create an administrator account for you. But on your day-to-day basis, don't go ahead and create an administrator account. It's like playing with fire. So I'm going to switch to this client account that I have set up that is using the editor role. And so now as my client user, when I go into edit the about page, and we'll have to take this over, I'm prevented from even unlocking. So the lock attribute isn't here. And now let's say I'm Doug, I can easily change my content around, say, hey, my radio show is actually at 10 p.m. or something like that, and make changes to my site. But it's a little bit more difficult for me to stab myself in the foot and break my layout and have to call my web designer at 3 in the morning and be like, hey, can you fix this for me? I broke it again. I'm sorry. This is still kind of like a limited set of things. It kind of prevents those two things we talked about, removing things and moving things around. I'd love to see this expanded in the future to also handle things like, hey, don't let certain attributes be edited, things like that. But I think this is a really cool first step. Another change that we have are some kind of improvements to text editing. This is one of those things that I guess for me wasn't something I totally understood the thing that people were upset about, but is turned out to be something that people I think really like, which is the ability to select text between multiple blocks without selecting all the blocks. So if I want to do this now, I can and just delete. Whereas previously, if I tried to select multiple blocks, I would actually select all the text in all those blocks. So this is like kind of first step in making this editing experience nicer. There's still not like an easy way of like making changes here. Like you can see, if I want to try and like bold this text, I can actually do it. I think I might be able to change color here. Let's see. I think this might just change the different blocks though. Yeah. So this is kind of like a first step at making this experience better. But it's not the full kind of like, okay, we're treating this as just one big Word document as opposed to a series of blocks, which has kind of been a criticism that people have presented for the Gutenberg editor when just editing text. But this is the first step in making that possible. Another cool feature is on the keyboard shortcut side of things. One of the things that I love about WordPress in Gutenberg is that you can insert blocks really quickly instead of going through the UI by using the keyboard. So if I want to insert an image block, I can type the / key, and then I can say image, and I can select the image, the gallery, the cover, median text, all these different things. What's new in WordPress 6.0 is we have a cool new shortcut for inserting links. So if I wanted to say, check out my about page, I can do left bracket and left bracket, and then it'll automatically pull up all the pages on my site and give me an easy way to link into them. So I can just hit enter. Yeah, the about page is what I want. And it inserts the page, and I can keep typing without really getting distracted and having to open up the link UI and navigate things around. It just makes it a little bit of a nicer experience. There have also been some couple of miscellaneous, I guess you could say, changes to different blocks. So one of these is broader block border support. So if I insert a columns block, let's actually see if we can get one from a template here. Three columns with text. Now let's use that one. So some cool changes here is that it's now easier for me to do border things. So if I select here, I can have these multiple border options and styles. So I can increase the width of my border. I can give it different styles between the different columns. We have out of the box dashes and dots, and we can change the colors. We can give it a radius if we wanted to. It always looks a little bit weird with dots, but maybe we'll change it back to dashes. That's a little bit nicer. So a kind of small change there. What we've also kind of like you might have seen here is that colors look a bit differently. Previously, color inputs in Gutenberg took up tons of space. A new change in 6.0 is they made them a bit more compact so we can fit more things on the screen and understand what's going on. So instead, now when I want to edit a color, I just click the color, and then I get this cool little pop-up here that gives me different controls and has some like color controls as usual. So I can switch things around. Say we want a pinkish border with pinkish text, very unreadable. But I'm sure someone can come up with some creative way to use that. Maybe that's good. I don't know. Let's see, what else do we have here? We also have changes to the gallery block. So the gallery block in WordPress 6.0, it got refactored to be made up of multiple image blocks. And now a new change in the gallery block is that I can adjust the spacing. So previously, this would be something that I would have to set in my theme and ask my theme author, hey, can you make this change for me? But now there's a UI option for it. So I can change the block spacing to make things super far away or super close together. So again, kind of like small miscellaneous changes to make things a little bit nicer. Here is what I think, though, is a pretty cool change. That's a little bit more of an impact, is changes to the featured image block. Or excuse me, to the cover block. The featured image part, I guess, is a spoiler. What's new is that I can now set the cover block to use the featured image of the post. So if I go over here into my post featured image, you can see I have this picture of a skyline in New York City. And if I wanted to, I could insert this into my blog post here by going into my media library and finding it and selecting it. But now if I change my featured image, that gets annoying. I have to move back, change the other thing here. What we can do now in WordPress 6.0 is we can actually say, hey, instead of using a specific image, use the featured image. And so that's a separate button right next to add media. It's a little bit confusing because it's an icon. But we click use featured image, and now the featured image gets used. And I can still modify this block as usual, maybe set a wide width, add here is some text, and we should probably make that text readable by selecting a color and do cool things like that. Now, I think where the power of this featured image block, or excuse me, cover block with featured images really lies is in full site editing. So with that, we'll kind of take a peek over to the full site editor changes in WordPress 6.0. And so what I want to be able to do is I want to have one of those really cool layouts where the featured image is up at the top of my page and for whatever blog post that I'm looking at. So we'll take a look at how we can do something like that. So I'm going to go into template parts, and we can see here we have this header template part, and this is the default one that's in the theme. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this using the copy menu. And so now I can create my own template part that uses the existing one as a basis. So I'm going to call this header featured image. Oops. Header featured image, and select the header slot. Hit create. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert the cover block. I'm going to select to use the featured image. And I'm also going to need to select to use a kind of like default color. So if we open up our cover block here, we can set our color. Maybe it has a default background of this and a default text color of this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to paste in those blocks from before. And so now I kind of have my existing header that I had before. And let's get rid of some of the spacing, I think. Where is the spacing coming from? Not sure. We're not going to worry about it. There's probably some more finessing that you'll want to do. But yeah, I'm going to insert that group block there, and we're going to hit save. And now we've created our featured image template part. And now we can go back to our other templates, and we can select and use it in our post template. So we have this single post template here, and I'm going to switch out the header for the header featured image version. And this is going to use the featured image of the post. We can say, hey, we don't need that anymore. We're displaying it somewhere else. We can get rid of this divider maybe. Yeah, we'll keep that. And maybe we'll add some margin to the top of this to make it look a little bit nicer. And then hopefully we'll get a cool example of that on the front end of our website. And go to my post, hit view. And yeah, so I now have the featured image of my post up here. And if I go ahead and let's say change the image of my post, or have multiple different posts, obviously is probably the bigger use case. Where we change it to this guy, the front end of my site will have that present as well. And yeah, we can make some changes here, like this has new WordPress install, is a little bit hard to read. You go into the editor and change the colors for that. Right here. Change our color to white. I think that'll be more readable. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty cool effect. And that's something that you'd have to have in your theme pre full site editing for you to be able to do or implement some custom code. And now this is something that you can kind of build yourself through the full site editor. And I think that's pretty neat to give users more additional options right built in. Another new change on that line of like customizing your site is changes to global styles. Whoops, let's go back to the editor. We have global styles over here next to the settings. And we'll get our nice little welcome to styles message. And what's new in WordPress 6.0 is that themes can now bundle multiple variations. And so this is kind of a little bit of a take similar to child themes, where you could say, hey, I have 5 different versions of my theme, pick the color palette, font choice, things of that nature that you want. And the new way to do this is by bundling styles through the theme. So we can see this is what my site looks like now. But if I want to, I can switch to this blue color palette that has this kind of like softish, palish white. It has a completely different font, if you noticed. This pink version, this kind of Swiss version. And these are all just defined in a theme.json file that theme authors provide. And it gives you a whole UI without you having to do anything. It makes it easy for users to pick different variations of your theme. And you don't ever need to now have this thing of like, OK, I've published 15 child themes in my theme or something like that. I can just ship additional theme JSON files. And what's really cool is that this is also the first peek at the fonts API. So you notice here that there are different fonts for each of these choices. And this is using the newly introduced and still at this point kind of beta web font support in WordPress. Right now, it's an exclusive feature for full site editing themes, but it is something that is coming new for everyone probably a bit later. But leading edge features are in full site editing. So keep that in mind when you choose what to build. A couple of other changes that we want to talk about is into the query loop. So the query loop is kind of what runs the posts that appear on your page. And by default, most of your queries are going to inherit the query from whatever template is being displayed. And so that means like on your home page, WordPress knows, hey, these are posts that are supposed to appear on your home page. But we can also customize these. And what's new is that I can now filter these by custom taxonomies if I wanted to. So I have a custom taxonomy that's set up. And I'd say, hey, only show me posts that are assigned this tag in custom taxonomy. Turns out I don't have any there, so maybe that might be a bad idea. And I can also set authors. So if I want to only show posts on my homepage for my client, I could do that. Or if I only want to show ones from me, I could do that. And these are new options that we didn't have before for modifying how our templates work. I am going to, though, revert this back to inherit the query from the default template. The power of that feature kind of really lies when you set up custom pages and things like that. But usually you'll want to keep your homepage template alone. Pro tip, that's probably how I'd keep things. Another new change is in comments. So this is an area where previously there wasn't much customization available to you. But now we have a lot of customization, uber customization. So this was, I guess, a fresh 2022 theme. But because I'm running in WordPress 6.0, I get this message about my post comments block. It says that for better compatibility with the block editor, please consider replacing this block with a comments query loop. So we'll do just that. We're going to hit here and we're going to remove it. And instead, we're going to insert after here the query loop block. And so now this inserts tons of blocks into my page for each of the comments. And it has things, if we open up our list view, we can see what this is all made of. We have our query loop, and there's a title for all of them, and it figures out, hey, this is how many comments we are, and formats all these things correctly. I can do some customization here, say, hey, don't show the comment count, don't show the post title. I can change colors and text here and make all those changes that I want. And I can also make some more changes into the layout of things. So let's say I wanted to, for instance, take the comment author name for some reason and maybe put the comment date with it. I can do that. And that's something before that would be almost impossible of doing pre-full site editing without actually editing PHP, but I can make those changes. If I wanted to maybe make the comments stand out a bit more, I could give them a background, maybe this vivid red background and white text. Whoops. Nope, vivid red background and white text. Not the most readable thing, but hey, design or something along those lines. We can add some padding here to make it a little bit more readable. Maybe separate these so top and bottom paddings are a little bit less. So we can make these kind of like major changes to how my comments look. Maybe the avatar, I want to make it really big for some reason. Link it to users' pages. I can change the borders. Maybe I only want rounded borders on one side. Give me this kind of like weird geometric effect. That seems to be all in the vogue these days. And there are all sorts of changes that I can do around here. For instance, I can even change the comment date. So if I select into the comment date block, there is a default format and a link to a comment, which I can turn if I wanted to. But if I don't want to use this default date format, I can pick one. So let's say I want to pick one with a time. I can do that by just selecting it. And so if we take a look at this on the front end now, we can see all the cool changes to my comments block. And again, this is just one of those things that previously, before full site editing, your theme author would need to make all these controls available to you, or you'd have to make these changes in PHP. But now with full site editing, you kind of have control over it all yourself. There are two other small things that I wanted to mention, I guess three. One is that we now have a code editor inside of full site editing. So this is very much, I'd say, a power user feature, but you may be aware of the code editor that exists when you're editing posts and pages, but we have this new way of doing that also inside of the full site editor. And so you can see all the blocks that make this thing up under the hood. But we'll head back from here. This doesn't look like a very friendly way of editing things. So we'll get back to the visual editor. But another change here, which is kind of part of the ongoing effort to make the different editors behave a little bit more similarly, is we also get this keyboard shortcuts menu. And so I've been mostly navigating with the mouse today, a little bit of keyboard shortcutting. But for those of you who are really like power users and don't take the hands off the keyboard, just keep things going, this shows you the full list of shortcuts that are available to you inside the block editor. And then a couple of other small tweaks. There are changes to kind of prioritization of things. So when I add a block here, that's not the right place to do it. If I insert after, whoops. And say, I don't know, footer. No, it's not coming up. Okay. Well, theoretically. Oh, there we go. Okay. So a change is that the block editor now suggests patterns in more places. So when you're creating layouts, it's easier for you to find what you're looking for. And it's trying to be super smart about saying like, hey, these are the patterns that you might be interested in, or saying that, oh, no, actually you want to insert in blocks and things like that. So it kind of like looks for places where patterns would best fit and things like that. It's just a kind of like change to make things a little bit nicer. So I think those are the main things that I wanted to touch on. I guess something that I'll briefly look at, but we're not really going to dive into because I think it's still a little bit too unfriendly for users, is previously in WordPress 5.9's first iteration with full site editing, we would get a list of templates and we can modify these if we wanted to, but we couldn't really create our own. We now can create our own. So I could say here, hey, I want to create a new template for authors, tags, taxonomies. This whole list has been expanded in WordPress 6.0. But the experience is still a little bit grim. When I create a new one, I get an empty page and I just kind of have to know what to do. This is like, okay, I'm going to put in a header and I can choose one of these headers. I can insert in a footer and build the whole thing exactly myself. And then I'll need to insert in a query loop block. And we'll probably want to move this before the footer. That's generally how websites work. We'll choose from a pattern here. That very big image makes it a little bit obnoxious. Let's say, yeah, we'll choose that one. And so now I have this kind of like custom template going on here. What I could actually do is make a couple of changes that show some things. If we insert in a group block after here, we could insert in the author name and say the author biography. And so now theoretically, when I go ahead to preview this and say, here is my kind of made up author template. So it's still a little bit unfriendly. You have to know what you need to do. I guess we should modify our group block here. We should take it out of the header. That would be a good start. And we'll inherit the default layout. Yeah, that gives a little something. It's cool. It's not something that you would have previously really been able to do, but now it's here for us. So yeah, with that, I think those are all of the changes that I want to get to with WordPress 6.0. As Bud kind of alluded to, this is a smaller polishing release. The very big features that we got recently were in WordPress 5.9, but it is just the story of continued improvements to full site editing. So I'm happy to answer any questions about Gutenberg, WordPress, etc. WordPress 6.0. Steve.
Block locking.
Yes.
Do that by code too?
So kind of. There is an attribute that you can set with blocks. So you could write custom JavaScript code. The main kind of like code that exists is in this blog post, block locking settings. So there's this filter that you can apply to say can lock blocks. And so like in this example post here, they say the only people who can lock blocks are people who can delete others' posts. And so that kind of lets you set it up so that, hey, this specific user can't do it. So if you wanted to, you say, hey, my client can't edit blocks. And that's the kind of like main code that is exposed. But you could in JavaScript say, okay, let's actually lock all these. You could probably create a button that said lock everything in this post, and it would apply the lock attribute to all those blocks.
So you can't lock a blog.
From PHP, not really, no. There's no like, hey, whenever the media and text block is in there, lock it. There's no great way of doing that now, but something that someone could write. Yeah.
What's the future of child theme?
That's a great question. I would say child themes are probably less necessary than ever. I think one of the things that was new was in 5.9 or 5.8, probably 5.9, I think, is bringing block patterns from WordPress.org into your actual like WordPress instance. And a kind of new change also is that we didn't cover because it's more of a technical change for theme authors, is that right now in 6.0, you can even say, hey, I want to show these patterns throughout my block editor for my theme that exist on WordPress.org. And so I think actual child themes will be less and less necessary. You'll just be able to say, hey, these are different theme.json files that have their styles. These are the different templates that I want to show. And that'll get you, I feel like, 80% of the way there.
Now, you can, if you wanted to create your own style variation, would that be a separate theme JSON? No, it's not a separate. How does that work?
So you have like multiple things. So if we go into GitHub, actually, we can even take a look at it here. Let's go back. So this is one of these things that changed in 6.0. There used to be a editor link here that would show you code. It's dived into the tools menu. So we go into the plugin file editor. Yes, I understand. I can break the world. Let's change the theme one. I can break the world again. So we can take a look at our theme.json file. And so we have all of our customizations here. We have, let's see where the fonts are supported. Yeah, here's different fonts, typography, font families, the built-in ones, source serif pro, all that kind of stuff. And we can take a look at our patterns that get shipped. And one of the things that will be changing probably, I guess, is that more and more people will ship their patterns on WordPress.org. So they don't need to make those changes. But yeah, here are the fonts that get bundled. Bundle your fonts, people. You will get hammered apparently by the German courts.
Yeah.
And so here are different theme.jsons that have been adapted for different styles. So here's Hulu.
Sorry, you could bundle your fonts.
Bundle your fonts, yeah. So if you have a site that your European people can visit, which the answer to is yes, because the internet is available to everyone. There was a recent ruling in a German court that said essentially if you are using Google Fonts on your website, that means that your website's users' IP addresses are being sent to Google. And that is unacceptable. So there is a kind of, this is more of a thing that if you're a theme author, you should be doing, is bundling your fonts. And by that, I mean including the actual font files. So instead of when you're writing your theme saying, hey, let's pull in this font from fonts.google.com/blah, blah, 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 instead actually download those files and include them in your theme. And when I talked about the font API, that is kind of first tier for full site editing themes, that web font API will actually make that a lot simpler in future versions, where it kind of like has its own ways of like making sure you have all the font files set up and delivered properly. So as an end user, it's not something, I don't think there's a great way of just doing that as an end user, but it's something that for theme authors should definitely be aware of and have been told you should be doing this by the WordPress.org themes team.
If you want to go back, I'm going to go back to theme JSON.
Mm-hmm.
You make changes to that,
Mm-hmm.
and the theme gets updated, goodbye changes. How do you preserve your?
Well, so I don't think you would create the .json files here. I think you would right now still have a theme that then provides those .json files, or like a plugin that provides those .json files. So you're not going to, like the same way as Ovoy is, you're not going to want to make those changes inside of the theme file itself because they'll get blown away, like you said. But also I think part of these will be like, so I mean, right now personal opinions as opposed to like someone who has any foreknowledge of things. But I would say that I think it'd be really cool if you could just grab theme.json files when you're using the site editor. So like when we go into editor theme, I would love, for instance, when I have browse styles here, it says default, blue, etc., for there to be a button that says, hey, look for other style.json files or theme.json files that exist on the web on WordPress.org. And so I won't need to like install a child theme. I'll just search for them, see a preview of them, and it'll just download the file. Yeah.
What plugin, in regards to this question, what are some plugins right now that can do that functionality, or would we write the plugin ourselves?
On the font side of things or the theme?
Oh, no, what he was asking about, yeah, you said
No variation.
Variation. I don't think. Well, so there are different theme options that kind of like have these things legacy ways.
Yeah.
But in terms of for Gutenberg, I'm not aware of any that exist of any theme.json creators. You kind of have this built into WordPress though.
Okay.
So if I go over to this menu, I have this export button. It says download your theme with updated templates and styles. So when I select like, here's my starting point or something like that, and I make any changes here and say like, hey, let's actually go into colors because it's probably the most dramatic way of changing this. I can change this background color, let's say to this. Now as a user, I can hit export. And this will give me a zip file that has a theme.json file that's been modified with all of my changes in WordPress. And so then I can use that and put it somewhere else. So you can kind of use full site editing as your design tool. And that's kind of the idea, is that you wouldn't need another plugin or another tool. You're just using WordPress to build WordPress, and you're saying, hey, here are all my awesome changes. Let's download them into a zip file, and I can distribute it elsewhere. Right now, upload on WordPress.org. But yeah, what I think would be really cool, and I'm not a member of the Gutenberg team, so this is just me opining. I do think it'd be really cool if like we had a theme browser that would take you to like WordPress.org themes, similarly to kind of how the customizer did, and would let you just preview them. And because they're just .json files, you don't need to like install the theme or activate it or anything. It can kind of just like preview it automatically. So I think that'd be really neat. But we're not there yet, but I think in the future. Any other questions? WordPress, Gutenberg, anything? Happy to answer them.
When you're doing any kind of editing in WordPress, can you do rollbacks?
So yeah, there is a revision feature in WordPress. There is local undo and redo. So we can go over here to undo my changes. But there's also a revision editor in WordPress. And this is one of those spots where, if I'm honest, hasn't received much attention. So it's kind of the old way of looking at things, but we can take a look here, for instance, to see all the changes that I made today. We have this link that appears with 9 revisions. And when I click that, this shows the actual like HTML of the blocks. And so we can see the last thing that I added was this cover block that uses the featured image. And if I want to, I can go back. And we can see this revision where I added all of this content. And we can go further back, and we can see where I had these changes from a previous version of this talk that I deleted before we got here. And if I wanted to, I could restore the revision before we added that featured image block. And it's all gone. And so that's the revision editor that we've had in WordPress for years now. It's one of those spots that has a lot of potential to make a really cool interface that actually shows you like visually what the changes are and things like that. But right now it's just a text editor. But that functionality is baked into WordPress, and revisions are baked into Gutenberg. There's just not a really pretty way of editing them right now. It's 7:30. Thank you, everyone.